students, how to care for them, and how to show teachers how much we appreciate the work that they're doing. So we had a terrific day yesterday and have an equally wonderful day in store today. I'd first like to recognize Dr. Chris Kennedy, the superintendent of Thomasville City Schools, who's with us today. Dr. Kennedy, thank you for being with us. And we'd also like to take just a moment and thank again our host here at the Thomas Entrepreneurship Hub, beginning with Dr. O'Brien, as well as Megan. So, in fact, there they are. So, thank you so much. I'd also like to thank a really important part of our team that's making this a successful event. In fact, they make every one of our meetings successful, but particularly when we're on the road like this, you know, it's you just don't snap your fingers and a meeting comes together like this. But in order to make it most effective, the technology that we use, particularly the streaming services that make our work available to the public, is so critical to our success and particularly the connection with our constituents. And so would you join me in thanking Mike Ramsey and all the members of his team that have done such a terrific job in every meeting, but particularly this meeting. So today we have two wonderful topics to work on. It includes our state strategic goals and objectives, which we'll work on in the morning, and then an important one of those objectives around supporting teachers in their preparation and continued growth and development through our licensure system. We'll work on that in the afternoon. So we have a great day ahead. Superintendent, you have any comments to kick our day off?
No, I'm ready to go. Let's do this.
All right. Ms. Kamnitz, do you have any comments from our strategic plan?
Briefly, I know James is disappointed not to be here for this, as the chair of the strategic planning committee, but looking forward to the work. And, I was thinking about it this morning. I think we approved this plan in about 2019. So that would be about 3 years ago, fall of 2019, somewhere around there. So, and like a good plan, it's never static. It's always living and breathing and growing. And so that's what we're going to do today, and continue the work that happened in September. Got us.
Thank you, Jill. And before I turn it over to Dr. Petrie Mark to get us started, I'd like to provide just a little context around the nature of the state public education strategic plan. The reality is that our state has had some element of a strategic plan since 1985 with the passing of the Basic Education Program. And the primary purpose of any strategic plan is to provide direction, focus, and clarity of effort, and in our case, for the state's K-12 public school system by addressing three primary questions. What's our purpose as defined in our mission? What do we want to achieve as expressed in our vision? And then how are we going to get there as stated in our strategic plan? So any strategic plan is a critical part of any high-performing organization, especially for organizations as complex and large as the K-12 public school system in our state. Strategic plans generally have three main components: setting goals and objectives, which we have and are working to refine on today. Then second, building action plans. And then third, mobilizing and focusing resources to achieve those goals. So as Ms. Kamnitz mentioned, in 2019, the state board is the constitutional authority to manage and lead the state's K-12 public schools, established a set of objectives to be achieved by 2025. To account for the impacts of COVID, we're now reviewing those objectives in terms of making refinements to better reflect the conditions that our students are in today and the goals that we need to achieve for their benefit. These refinements won't change the overall vision of the plan, which is to deliver the education needed so that every North Carolina student is equipped to become contributing members of our society. The next step on building action plans is probably the greatest near-term opportunity we have to impact our students' outcomes. So we look to our partners in DPI to develop these action plans for two reasons: to put into action the responsibilities we have in the state in meeting the objectives, and to provide clarity for every employee in DPI and the partners across our state, particularly our districts and charter schools. In this way, the strategic plan mobilizes and focuses resources and effort at both the organization and individual levels. And so everything we do, every investment, every policy decision, every agenda meeting item, actions and implementation plans, daily tasks throughout DPI, as well as our legislative agenda, should be aligned to achieving these objectives. Similarly, local districts and charter schools should have their own strategic plans, and most do. They should incorporate into their plans how they'll contribute to achieving these statewide goals in their schools, as well as how any local goals they wish to add. The department should then include in the action plans how we will support local district and charter schools, as well as what's expected of them in meeting the state goals. So in short, our action plan should include these three areas: actions the state board needs to take to accomplish their accountabilities, as well as how to support districts and charter schools; actions that DPI needs to take to accomplish their accountabilities in the plan, as well as how to support districts and charter schools; and then the actions that districts and charter schools need to take to accomplish their accountabilities. So with that as sort of a contextual setting for the discussion we're about to have, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fifi Moore.
Good morning to everyone, and I have an outstanding team with me today who will be facilitating this morning's session. We have Dr. Cohen-Vogel, I always say Vogel and not Cohen-Vogel, with us from DataWorks, and then Jenny Korn from the Department of Public Instruction, who works with data and research. And the three of us will really help facilitate this morning's session with quite a bit of activities. You will see Post-it notes that are near you, green Post-it notes with the number. So of course that means you will be going into groups shortly. Also, you will see that your goals and objectives for the state board strategic priorities are there on charts throughout the room. And then you will see we have chart papers that have question numbers for you, which means that today you will have questions that we will ask you to answer regarding this work that hopefully will get us to some concrete next steps. So that will be the flow for today. We will take about a 10 to 15 minute break during all of this processing time to get us ready for our work. Today we have one main objective, and it is to review the state board priorities, which are their goals, objectives, and the key components. But we will do that through the lens of metrics and data that may be available for each one of these goals, objectives, and components. So we'll talk a lot about the data, what data we have, data that we may not have, and how do we make concrete decisions around that. So one of the things that we want to share with you is that we intentionally had presentations yesterday from our schools, school districts, and charter schools that related to some of the state board's priorities. So we started our day yesterday with a heavy focus on school nutrition. And as we know, one of our goals in Goal 1, one of our objectives, is to increase student participation in critical school nutrition programs. Then we shifted to discuss an objective from Goal 2, which is to ensure that our students are reading on grade level at the end of 3rd grade. And so we had several of our schools and districts share with you things that they are doing. And we had an outstanding letters demonstration yesterday. And then thirdly, we highlighted another objective in which we want to increase the number of charter schools that are seeing academic progress, operational progress, and financial stability. And so that was discussed as well. So we did that very intentionally to put our focus on many of the state board goals in which we, in many cases, have data for, or in some cases we may not. So that is definitely going to take us into today's presentation. I also want to remind everyone who was with us back in late August, we had an activity in which we compared the work of the strategic plan and its priorities to an airplane ride. Do you remember that? We showed you the picture of an airplane in flight, and then we proceeded to discuss, where are we on this journey? Are we at the gate? Are we on the first leg of the journey, second leg of the journey, or we have already landed and we are ready to go? That also will set the stage for today's discussion with you all. So I always like to talk about what we have done, where we are, and where we are going. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dan. He talked about the dashboard during the presentation in late August, but we felt like we needed a little bit more time to delve into the dashboard and its work. So I will turn it over to Dan. And after that, I think we might take a quick break, give you some time to maybe play around in the dashboard if you have your devices there. And then we'll come back from the break and get into small group discussions. Turn it over to you, Dan.
Good morning. It's nice to see you all again. I'll introduce myself. I've met many of you and talked about this a little bit before. I'm Dan Cohen-Vogel. I've come from about 22 years in public service, primarily education focused, working for legislatures in a couple states and university systems. And in the last few years, I've had a consulting practice focused on building data and analytical capacity for educational organizations. And so my work with you over the last year and a half has been focused on that, on building out a set of data tools that can help to inform the work that you're doing around your strategic plan, around policy at the state. And so today I'm going to step back. We've talked about this a couple times before in very small bits. Some of you have been involved from the beginning of our work around dashboards as part of the strategic planning committee. Some of you have heard about this at a couple planning and work sessions or other places, and some of you haven't heard about it at all. And as we had conversations with folks, we've realized that there's maybe a need to do some level setting and make sure that we all are on the same page about why I'm doing this work that I'm doing for you and what we've done so far and where we're headed, and also to give you a little bit of time to look at the tool and share what you're seeing in it here in this room. So I'll start with an overview of where we started. Why my understanding was why I was doing this work, why we're building this this dashboard set. We started by building a foundation last year that was guided primarily by your strategic plan. My steering committee was a strategic planning committee, and the framework was to build a set of data tools that would inform your work around that strategic plan. It was closely aligned with a comprehensive remedial plan, with Leandro comprehensive remedial plan, which includes a number of relevant metrics as part of its action goals and accountability system that plan prescribes that are very closely aligned with many of your strategic plan metrics. And so those have been the sort of reference points as we've talked about what are the pieces of data that are relevant to include in these dashboards. And as you assess your plan, as you talk about going forward, the work that I do for you will be informed by those discussions and by any sort of changes or additions that you might make to that strategic planning process. So a few points to keep in mind that might be helpful as we talk about these and as I show you some of the tools. We shared a few pieces of this, I think a prototype of the dashboards in spring or summer of 2021. and then again, a little bit more of an update in the last planning and work session back in August. We've divided this work into what we called phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was the work we did last year. It was the beginning of this work, and it was intended to set up the framework. What does that website look like? What is the visual, the platform look like that the data will be visualized? And how can we take a sort of small bite at the apple in terms of the broad set of metrics that are represented in the strategic plan and show them and start to build those into this framework. And so we did that by looking at those metrics, those pieces, objectives, and components underneath the different plan goals that were represented in already publicly available data and various reports that are available in different places, and to think about how do we bring those pieces together from different places so that for your discussions, for your plan, you have it all in one place, and it can be a tool for following how the state and school districts and schools are progressing on those metrics. So that work was done roughly between about March or April and August of 2021. I think we shared a beginning of it at a planning and work session in May of 21, and we finally went live on the website with the first portion with the phase 1 dashboards in August or early September. And this board, after going through that process in August of 2021, approved phase 2, which we've, after some process of thinking about what that would look like and going through the normal contracting processes that we have in state government, started in this past summer. So May, June, we started building in phase 2. And so far, what we've done is to take some of the feedback we got when it launched. How does this work? What's the functionality? How might we improve some of the interactivity that people have with the data? And also to, and make those improvements, and also to update the data with additional years that came in after we launched. So whereas it was through 2019, I think when we launched it, the data are now up through 2021 on the dashboard. You have in your packet some screenshots, and my intent was to sort of go through some of the visuals, and the screenshots were largely there because up until yesterday the website went down, and not the website, not the DPI site, but the State Department of Information Technology site where all the dashboards for the state are kept went down for about 5 days. And it was fixed, and so we weren't sure we were going to be able to demo it. I can drive and demo, or do you want me to sort of narrate through? Would that be? Okay. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the general layout, and then walk through one of the dashboards in a little more detail. And then I think you would like to take a break from the talking and give everyone a chance to play a little bit, and then come back and talk about some of what you've seen. Sure. Let me pause there because I want to make sure, in terms of the overview of what we're doing, why we're doing it, I think I just want to make sure I don't have any questions about the overall framework or anything I've said or didn't say. Okay. Good. Okay, so are we on the webpage here?
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said the data is through 2021, so it's not real-time data.
That's right.
It's okay.
The data here are retrospective. We have had people ask about the ability to report real time on things like school discipline and at least the cadence of reporting that the principals or districts are doing. And that's possible. As you know, it's just a little more complicated, a little bit different kind of thing than looking and doing the kind of quality checking on retrospective data.
So do we not have the 2022 data yet, or it just hasn't been?
I believe, and I probably would have to defer to some of your folks for exact dates. I believe most of the data, similar to the stuff that, the data that get reported in the report cards and other places, will start becoming available in November. Is that right? And so we would wait till that's publicly available before we put it up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if you were to go to the, am I on the website or? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Can I go to the website here? I can. I'm sorry. I thought I was going to be using this thing. Browser window. Maybe I'll show it first. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Apologies. So I'll just walk through where this is and how you would get to it, and then show you some examples. So if I were to go to the State Board's website, which is housed within the broader DPI website, and scroll down, you can see there's discussion of mission, vision, and goals, which are apropos because that's what this dashboard is focused on. And either at the bottom left here, where it said there's a dark rectangular button that says NC Strategic Dashboard Monitoring Tool, or over in this right-hand side where there's a vertical kind of rectangular banner that also has a link that says the same thing, I can click, and that will take me to the page where these dashboards sit on the website. And it starts with a little introduction of what's there, what's in the dashboards. And then if I scroll down, it's the sort of landing page for the dashboard. How do I get in and see? And there are 3 tabs. There's a dashboard overviews. There's a tab, and that shows you various metrics and some summary information about those metrics that I can click on, links, and get to more detail. And those are divided up or organized according to your strategic plan areas. Opportunity, we've sort of shorthanded them as opportunity, performance, and resources. And although the third goal of the strategic plan is more broadly focused on resources, because of the availability of data largely and the kinds of things that were able to be operationalized, we made the decision to summarize it as human resources because that's where the focus was in the tools. I can also look at this in a different form that's more of an outline that just lists all the metrics that are shown in the dashboards, and again, grouped by those areas of the strategic plan. And then also on that menu, there's a glossary that lets me learn if I would like to know what some of those terms mean, whether it's the metrics themselves or some of the terms within the metrics. So if I were to go to one of these, I'll use as an example. Let me also explain. I think I noted before, for the most part, these are driven directly from the objectives that are under those strategic plan goals. Objective under Goal 1, which is the opportunity area, Objective 1 deals with exclusionary discipline practices, and we built a dashboard around exclusionary discipline practices. There are also a few pieces here that were informed by related research about barriers to improvement, about correlates to student performance and correlates to some of these metrics. And those were informed by research, I think largely by partners that the board and the DPI were working with in the prior years. I was the beneficiary of some of the results of that research and pointed to things like chronic absenteeism and other factors as key determinants of school performance or of correlates to improvement. So here you'll see under this list of metrics, there will be many that have something in parentheses that says SP objective and then tells you what specific objective from the plan it comes from. There are others like kindergarten readiness or chronic absenteeism that were related contextual information that pointed at, that were considered correlates for or barriers to improvement. So that's, for example, if I clicked on chronic absenteeism, it will bring up a page that's very similar for all these metrics. Some of them we don't have school level data on, they're only measured at a higher level. Some of them we don't produce aggregated statewide indicators of, and they're only measured at a district or a school level, and that will be reflected up here. But most of them will have 3 tabs at the top that say state, district, and then custom comparison. And the state look will be the same across all these different dashboards. On the left, top left, there will be the kind of summary line chart that shows recent trends in this metric. On the top right, there will be a map that shows district by district current actual performance, or if I want to pull down this little menu here, I can see this year compared to last year and how that breaks out across the district and the state, with different shadings showing different types of performance. Absenteeism is one that I'm sure many of you know is a little troublesome when you look at what happened over the last couple of years, and typically almost across the board you see it trending pretty sharply upward in 2021. And then below that, all the dashboards will have a bar chart, at least in the state level, that shows district by district what the trend is, whether it's compared to prior year or if I want to compare it to the state average. And if I'm looking at districts here, I can also group them by county economic tiers or by education region. And also statewide, I might want to look by student subgroup, which was a particular focus given to me as part of this work. If we want to focus on with an equity lens on how these metrics break out across different student groups. And so that also lets me look at all the different student groups compared to the state average. And if I want to get more detailed, I can go and look at the district level, and all the district level tabs will have a similar kind of look. At the top, it will be a kind of a trend for that district. The tool doesn't let us sort of rotate or everything always defaults to the same place. And in this case, because we have them listed alphabetically, it always defaults to Alamance Burlington. I try when I do demo this not to always look at Alamance but they do okay. So this shows a trend for Alamance or whatever district is selected. It shows some basic summary statistics, gender, race, ethnicity breakdowns, percent of the students in the district who are categorized as economically disadvantaged, and the overall ADM or average daily membership. And then below, similar to the look on the state level information, we've got all the schools in the district listed in that bar chart, and I can group them either by school type, elementary, middle, high school, or by CSI, TSI categories, which are targeted improvement categories, federal categories that apply to some of these schools. In addition to looking at schools, I can also look within that district, like I did with the state, at different student subgroups and how they're performing compared to the prior year, or how they're performing compared to the district average. And then finally, we built what was a request that came kind of late in the process last year. And I think we've done a little work to refine it based on feedback we got. And I think this is probably an area in terms of the user friendliness that we might have some more improvements to make. But I think the concept was good, and it's an interesting interactive tool that would allow someone who's maybe a little bit more of a power user or maybe a little bit more interested in some of the weeds of their particular district or region to dig in and say, I'm interested in looking at, and I could just come up with something, how are female students looking with regard to absenteeism in Alamance schools? And I'd like to compare that to other schools in my region. So I can hit this little menu button here, and I can say, well, I'm interested in the Piedmont region, and I'm also interested in other districts that are in counties that are considered this level 2 of economic distress, according to the Department of Commerce's different economic tiers. And then that gives me a subset of all the districts in the state down here in this bottom list. And I can say, well, let's show me all those. Or maybe I'm not interested in those city districts. I'm only interested in the county level districts, or there might be some other criteria I would select. And so then I would go to this tool, and that shows me how Alamance compares to the average of that group. Or if I didn't select too many so that it was readable, I might say, show me how Alamance compares to each of those broken out. And so there are a whole host of other ways this might bring up questions that you would want to dig into, but at least it lets you see how are we tracking with others that we might consider our peers. That peer group might change depending on the metric or the context, and it would allow someone like a superintendent or someone looking more specifically at that region to dig in. Oh, I missed a question. Oh, yes. I'll stop there. That was a lot of information. Are there any questions? Anything I can explain or show further?
I have a quick question. Tell me, who is responsible for managing this? Inputting data.
At this point, all of these data are coming from publicly available sources. They are report card, accountability reports, a little bit from DHHS, from the state demographer, but they're coming from publicly available sources that are updated on generally a regular schedule every year.
So there is a regular schedule.
Yes. It can vary because circumstances and data challenges throw a little wrench in there occasionally, but generally a regular schedule. And then at this point, I have myself and some developers who are managing, who are updating, who are making corrections or tweaks or whatever might come up.
But Dr. Austin, I asked a really good question about sustainability.
Yes.
What's the sustainability?
So,
A great question.
Well, I didn't use that word, but that's in my brain.
So let me tell you what we've discussed in that regard, and then that may be something that we want to talk about in the coming months as well. We've built this on a technology that is hosted by the State Department of Information Technology. It's a server that's going to be there for a long time with a software tool that is probably the most widely used globally for this purpose, Tableau, and for which it's not that hard to find people who either know it, and it's not that hard to learn. Even I learned a little bit, and so we're building this with the thought of it as a turnkey project that, if desired at some point, whether it's next year or the year after, an analyst could take this on. There's a documented process in place. There's a regular cadence of data updates, and someone could update these dashboards, which are mostly annual, which are our annual data at this point, once a year, twice a year, run updates, and it would be a matter of a day or two to update them and a day or two to do the quality checking, and so it's a relatively manageable workload for someone once they learn the tool.
I have another question. I've lost this spot, but I was combing through it and I saw some data point on school climate. So would that data come from our TWCS, the Teacher Working Condition Survey?
That's an excellent question. And that is the focus of a conversation that Maria will be leading a little later, is That's not on here
Because
yet.
I'm trying to make connections between what I know that comes to the state board monthly and how I'm trying to connect it to how is it rolling into this?
That is a source of data we think could be applicable to that metric, but at this point, we haven't defined it. And that's part of the work we have to do.
Okay.
What's the communication plan for getting this out to districts and schools? This is really good information that I think could be used for school. Improvement planning, which we're already kind of past for most schools and districts this year, but I think it's great for monitoring as well.
So our goal today is to get some clarity on next steps regarding this, and then put those next steps into action, then do the communication plan. There is about a 2.5-page communication set of thoughts that we have put on paper to start that process. But we do feel like we have to get clarity on some of the metrics and some of the objectives before we do that. But there is consideration to absolutely do that.
And also jumping ahead on that, we will be discussing a little bit later what the engagement looks like both within the state government, across DPI and with local education agencies to help do some of that work to define what does school climate look like in a dashboard like this. And I think part of that engagement is laying the groundwork for that dissemination plan as well.
And I think you raised a really good point about the fact that there hasn't been a great deal of communication about this yet. That's why we're really trying to think about it in this phase 1, phase 2. The dashboard is posted, it's live. So now is an opportunity, a really good opportunity to go out and talk with our stakeholders at a lot of different levels. I think a question about what is the purpose of the dashboard from the board's perspective, and then how might local leaders use it to guide, what is the purpose of, and how should it be used, and could it be used at the local level? I think your point about, like, from a principal standpoint, obviously the lens that you're bringing to the table, this notion of what can I learn about my school and as it relates to other schools that look like me. Like, I think that's the part, honestly, that Dan showed about how you can look at peer counties is not even a place I had gotten to, I'm being totally honest. I've looked at the dashboard a lot, but I had not drilled all the way down there yet. But that is something I know that districts and schools and charters ask me all the time. Like, that's great that I can see myself compared to my state, to the state and my district, but I want to know what I look like compared to other schools that look like me, other, from across the state, other districts that look like me from across the state. So talking about that perspective and that functionality, because in a lot of the dashboards and a lot of the data, like the teacher working conditions in the dashboard that's up right now, you can't do that. That is, you have to go like school by school, district by district. You can't say I want to look at all the other high schools in my region that are, that are TSI, CSI, or that have this or that. So I think that's a great functionality that we haven't really talked to schools and districts about yet, or the state.
Did you have a question?
So is there any data that's been filtered into the dashboard that we wouldn't already readily have access to?
At this point, I think if you wanted to find anything that's here, you could find it in a report or a downloadable file somewhere in state government. There are a couple things that required some custom help. The DHHS had to generate some of the data that we put into the 4-year-old pre-K participation, and the accountability folks at DPI helped to sort of, I guess, generate a slightly different look at ACT scores for high school juniors than what was published in other places, but it was still coming from public sources. So for the most part, this is already publicly available. I think when we get to these other metrics that's where, frankly, a more challenging data or sort of governance kind of conversation comes in about what is it what makes sense to show to reflect school climate, and which of that information that's available will be useful for policy making decisions or for monitoring progress. I hope that answered your question.
I have another question. This is probably going to be one of those really dumb questions. So here it comes. How many dashboards do we have at DPI? How many do we have? Is there just one super dashboard, or do we have several? And are they, can they be married?
There's a list.
Yes. So we do have a list of those toward the end of the presentation. Of those dashboards that are connected to the work of K-12 or part of DPI. But yes, there is more than one to your initial question.
And I think to Ms. White's point, you know, they're all pulling from this relatively the same data. They're cutting it in different ways. So I think a question for the board is, and I think that's part of the conversation about purpose, right? The purpose of this dashboard is to reflect the state board strategic plan. So what makes this board or this dashboard special and unique and able to be that voice and reflect the priorities of the state board? But also I think being aware that there's a lot of there's a lot of other dashboards out there, but they don't represent the State Board of Education. They're bringing their own lens, their own question, they're connecting the data in their own ways. Like, as many of you know, I got to work on the My Future NC dashboard. That was part of my work when I was there with them, and that is pre-K through the workforce. But we made a lot of decisions all along the way about what data metrics go in. So, you know, every place along the way, and that went all the way post-secondary and workforce. So I think that there's a real opportunity here now that we have, like, because you need a version 1.0. You have to get something up first, and then to say, okay, is this meeting the intent? You know, the intention. What can be tweaked? Like that, the heaviest lift is getting it up, right? And now being able to see this kind of functionality. And so now as a board having an opportunity to say, does this represent our priorities as a board? What else needs to be added? What's missing? Like, I think it's the right time to think about that question. And I think we have some opportunities for you guys to look pretty tightly at what data elements have been identified, aligned to the state board strategic, the goals and the kind of indicators that are outlined. And knowing that these other dashboards, like where do we want to put our time and effort and energy and kind of policy power? You know, like that to me is a really rich and important discussion for the board.
So many of the questions that you have asked today will come through in the next set of slides. But to get us started, we do want you to have some discussion amongst yourselves, your groups that you're currently in, regarding these three questions. Is the stated purpose of the SBE dashboards clear? Are there suggestions for refining that purpose? And with that purpose, who are or ought to be the target users of this set of data tools? So, okay, and I can hand it back to you for us to do some of that discussion and that work. And then we'll take a break after this portion, but we wanted to make sure, has everyone been able to get online and get to the dashboard? Are we good? And they're saying they can help if you need any help getting there. It would be helpful to have it accessible during the next set of activities. It would be very helpful. But if you need help, during the break, we'll kind of walk around and get you set up.
So just make sure on the first one, that we're starting from a consistent place. What I heard Dan say is that the purpose of this work is to provide data to monitor our progress in achieving the goals and objectives of our strategic plan, as well as to show progress on the comprehensive remedial plan. That's where we're starting from, is the stated purpose. Is that a correct statement?
That was the purpose as we framed it with the committee, I think, when we started this work. And I think in addition, we talked a bit, to Jenny's point, about who is the target audience then. And so, you know, as you consider questions of who ought to be using this, we started building it with the idea that it was a sort of high-level policy decision tool, not kind of a thing for parents but I'd be interested, you know, once you get a chance to look at it, I think we'd be interested in your perspective on what that answer is.
In fact, for further Eric's point, one thing by way of question, and this is an institutional knowledge question, but my recollection of starting from an institutional standpoint was it included the fact that in the Leandro litigation, that the judge presiding over that case at that time when this work started wanted this information gathered in a way that it could be easily accessible as well to both the board as a party in that case, the state as a party in that case, and to the court.
Yes.
I'm just trying to confirm my institutional.
I think you probably know that in much greater detail than I do, but yeah, there were specific pieces of that plan. I think there were action steps in certain parts of the plan that specifically talked about data dashboards or public presentation of data to monitor progress on the plan.
And I only say that because of the first question.
So we will give you some processing time right now to have discussions with folks near you about these three. It's critically important to get consensus here as we move on with the next set of activities. So we're going to take about 7 minutes. You can certainly leave a break into that time, and then we'll come back together. Okay?
Yeah, you can't. You just can't. You're gonna be in. It's just not. So my question, my person, is that my question?
Are we meeting in based on these numbers or?
Right now, these are right.
So we're saying that now, okay, thanks.
Sure. Yeah.
If you want to look at, I'm on my screen. That's the moment I know there's a problem.
Relevant, yeah, I'm. Well, that's always a problem.
I can help with you.
So scroll up into this and then. But they're in alignment.
Where are you at? So, what I it is looking at, I missed it.
I don't know. It's gonna stay on. See, because if I were the mistakes. In a few minutes, we'll transition. So that says statewide, there are.
98
So I wonder if I
sections per 1,000.
Exciting. So.
You can see that the trend is. Oh, yeah.
This from our strategic.
Yeah, so you can see.
Okay, I mean,
Overall,
Yeah.
the strategic.
so I think in absence of data.
Yeah. And we're in what space, which phase are we in? Two.
As a parent, I would go to the inside part. That's what.
I'm glad you did that.
Really interested in knowing the stage.
So. Get right down. I guess my question was, with all these dashboards, with all these dashboards, this dashboard interact with them.
back into Holt Root because we would love to hear from you as you've had time to go through the dashboard. We'd love to hear your thoughts and then also your responses to the 3 questions that are posted here. So at this time, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Thorne and Dr. Cullen-Vogel.
That was helpful. Thank you. All right, so you see in the dashboard what questions came up, what kind of feedback for Dan and for me, and then we can also, if there's conversations around purpose, we would just like to hear from you. We felt like you all were having really good, rich conversations. So, do you guys mind starting, Dr. Bridges, and do y'all mind starting? What did you see in the dashboard? What were your conversations?
I think a very good conversation, but the first thing which was helpful from Valerie was that for this to be useful on the district level, timeliness is really important.
The what?
Timeliness.
Thank you.
Meaning that like the data needs to come out on a regular cadence, or that needs to be really clear when the data is being released, or that it needs to happen more quickly. Like,
there's no reason for me to look at it, right? Because so many things have changed in a school system that if it's not timely, the latest data that I would have, then I don't have this.
if the purpose is to be driving local level conversations. Others?
We talked about the fact that district strategic plans were not necessarily aligned to ours. And so that we were sort of were concentrating on the original question. I don't know, what else? Anybody else want to?
What? They told me that I was absolutely living a pipe dream. Because there's a disconnect in what the state board has said as its strategic plan, and that the districts don't know and don't care what the state board said was its plan. And I said, well, wait a minute, what goal 1, goal 2, and goal 3, why in the world can't we build consensus around those 3 things? And we said portrait of a graduate was missing, that would be like goal 4. And that the flexibility should go to the districts in how they meet those goals, but we got to get everybody on the same train, going in the same direction. Otherwise, we've got a lot, it's a train wreck. They told me I was a dreamer this one, but that is the problem. Valerie was so eloquent. Sort of share with them what you said about what your district, and as a leader of her district.
Yeah, so 2 things, again, with the dashboard. I think the dashboard is a great idea. How would I use it? It would have to be timed. There are some things you can certainly go back to and do some comparatives with them. I think that would be helpful. I'm certainly going to next week use one of these pieces to say, just to see that chronic absenteeism, to have some dialogue during our district leadership team meeting. So do you know this data's here? Well, now let's look at it. Even if it is not the most current, it's useful. That part is useful. So with the strategic plan, my comment was, so the goals, there's agreement that these are important goals. Is this what our district strategic plan looks like now? Right? If I go through my strategic plan, could I highlight and find some commonalities? Yeah. I could, but that I don't think as a state that we've been looking at what is the State Board of Education's goals. We've been looking at our district and what we need to do uniquely. Are there some connections? Sure, but that's the case.
And I think, institution, I've been a part of the state board strategic plan goal process for many years. Like, there's been a number of strategic plans, and I don't think that's unique to this this one, right? Like, I remember Dr. Atkinson going around, the superintendent, going around talking about the plan way back when, and it wasn't that all the districts immediately aligned. So I think it is like setting the vision, and then how do you engage district and charter level leadership for around awareness, and then about the connections between what's going on at the local level and these state policy conversations that you all are leading. Oh, I think that's super helpful. Thank you, guys. Superintendent, chair, vice chair.
We also didn't necessarily talk about the 3 questions. We not good for followers. So we actually looked at some specific metrics on here and talked about what does it mean if, for example, we've got great data on goal 1, objective, component 1, 2, and 3, 1.2.3, the school nutrition programs. So there are some pieces that have really good data that we can point to and say, because we're measuring this, it's happening. And then there were some others that we don't have data for yet, and maybe they need to be rewritten in a way that would facilitate data collection for those pieces. Anything else?
Yeah, I have, so in response to Valerie's comments, that really resonates with me in my personal experience on a local board of education. I'll just be kind of blunt. We like to do our own thing. We like to do what we think is best for our group of students, whether it's a classroom, a school, a district, or whatever. But even in saying that, and even in the county that I come from, which is always, fiercely independent, we're interested in, well, how is our perspective aligned with what state wants? When we put our strategic plan together, no, we didn't go, point by point with whatever the state was saying, but we asked ourselves, we want the same things that we want across our state? And 9 times out of 10, the answer was yes. It's just, we might have used different words, we might have approached it differently. Yeah, we want to close opportunity gaps. Yes, we want to improve performance. And yes, we want to increase educator preparedness. But locally, here's how we're probably going to do it. That's the point of the strategic planning, is to connect and find this alignment. And I'm not surprised at all that districts aren't even considering what we're doing. We haven't done what we're doing right now. Moving into action plans is the way to create tools that will assist districts, support that will assist districts, which will align to our common goals. I found these 2 pages to be really helpful because the conclusion I drew from that have the number of elements that either have data or have some related data in goals 1 and 2, all but 1. We have a great place to start. It's like goal 3 needs a lot of work. And perhaps there's even work that needs to be done in some of the others to connect with what data we have or what data we. I found this to be fruitful.
Well, and I mean, kind of piggybacking on what Dr. Bridges said, I think it would be a huge win just for this session alone if superintendents go back and think just what is one piece I can take from the existing dashboard to facilitate conversations at the local level. Like, we all know chronic absenteeism is going to be something we all need to talk about for the next couple of years, and the issues with that. So I think you're exactly right that the board setting the expectation that this is a priority, and then local level superintendents and school leaders using what the board's kind of putting out there for the state to facilitate local conversations about where our priorities are for the kind of the current year, the current and upcoming school year.
Yeah, or maybe just slightly turn that around. I'd love to just listen to superintendents say, and then we see how does what we're hearing connect to what we're thinking. You know, they don't need to fit our, it's kind of like connect with the student where the student is, but let's connect with the superintendents where they are.
Wonderful, because that was one of the questions we had about next steps is this a good opportunity to have some conversations with our local level leaders about what the timeliness question, the data question, you know, how can the dashboard that the state's investing in meet the needs of the local leaders? How can we tweak this version 1.0 now that we have something for you all to react to? What else needs to be there? So I think that's a great suggestion. All right, yes.
One point on chronic absenteeism, which I think everyone agrees on, is that we can't really have a full analysis of that unless we do disciplinary data and put them together, because if you don't account for the level of absentees that are created by disciplinary decision making, then you're missing a very large portion of the chronic absenteeism. I don't know that we've ever made the effort to correlate that information. And if I've seen it beats out.
Do some interactions of this data, because I think in the lab, at least when I've talked at the local level, the issue with chronic absenteeism for the 21-22 school year was so exacerbated by, you know, illness and quarantining. And so layering on top of that, this issue that you're raising with disciplinary practices that lead to kids missing school, not being present and counter present in school is certainly something that we could be talking about. And I think the dashboard is a great way to elevate that conversation. Right. Oh, I was going to have Dr. Oxendine and her team.
Okay, our team.
Your team, y'all are a team.
Here we go. So we talked about, first of all, it's very important to put your hands on it, to manipulate, to move things around, to figure out, okay, where's this link going to take me? How do I get from A to B? I think that's a real critical part of a dashboard. So, and then I, you know, what I discovered once I was successful at doing a couple of things, I thought, oh, you know, I kind of get this. We thought about users. We talked about who could use it. We talked about like chambers. Chambers could have access to it. And some, you know, I'm sure they could. Maybe a little bit more design features. I'm just not sure. But chambers, I can see that. I'm thinking of, we talked about who else could use this, school improvement teams as they develop their school improvement plan each year. Certainly local board members as they go off to retreats and look at their 5-year, 10-year, 25-year plan. Could certainly, it's learning how to use it, knowing the features, knowing the questions that can be answered from the data. That is so key. And then, of course, I'm thinking about our EPPs. Our EPPs, and when we do our department or our School of Education strategic plan, most definitely we can go into this website, into the dashboard and say, oh my gosh, look at how well Robeson County did in reading, and it's because of something happening in our reading program. We need to stay at it or something like that. So EPPs would certainly have a reason to go into the dashboard. Mm-hmm. And I think purpose, question to purpose, I think that really depends on the user, because purpose will vary depending on, the EPP may have a different purpose than the local school board. Anything else?
No, I think you put a real cover on it, but I want to emphasize the point that the board chair made concerning Ann, my colleague. We tend to leave out boards of education. You know, we jump to superintendents, who carries out the goal of directives from the board of education. But it's important. This kind of, I'm a sitting board member of a local board. And information like this is extremely important during the planning stages as we look at moving forward and COVID and all those things. But I'm not sure that the average local board knows about stuff like this. But we need some kind of way to let them know about it. I mean, School Board Association, or Jack Holt's group, or whomever, but in order for it to be effective, you have to have knowledge of it. The user part of it, make it as user-friendly as possible. I was going through it along with my colleagues, and, you know, and my fingers I got a white there, and I'm sorry, your last name. The gentleman sitting next to your left, on your left. He came in and helped guide me through it with just a finger. A little thing about moving, not impressive. You know, and some people would take and get beat up over it. You know what I'm saying? As user-friendly as possible. The information is ideal, but it got to get out to the right people. And the right people sometimes, it's not with one group, it's all groups. And the thing I brought up about commerce, we know how business world is. We know how they make their decisions. And sometimes their decision is based upon false information from a former client who got upset. But here's data that is real data supported by DPI and the state board that says this is going on, this is what we're doing, here are the groups that's ready for the skills that we're talking about that's going to be out there beyond the college world. That's what I want to see. I mean, that's what I hope. And I enjoy playing with it through this stuff.
How about this? So the North Carolina Chamber has an education dashboard.
Okay.
You know, your question about what other dashboards are out there, and I'm thinking, who helped them pick those data elements? Shouldn't the leadership education community, you know, who is involved in those conversations? Wouldn't it be helpful to them to know, we've got what, maybe you guys can use our data?
Well, even if not, just knowing what is important to the chamber.
Right.
Would inform changes in the data, revisions of the data. My other question has to do with this. And I asked this question, data board, the various dashboards, can they interact?
Short answer is no. Because they're all owned, like the chamber.
I see.
And they have put on, to your point, what is important to the chamber. But I do think, I think one important group to talk to are our kind of partners that all have dashboards.
That's what I'm saying, within that community.
Interact is a broad set of possibilities. You can link these resources. So if we know that Division of Juvenile Justice or another division of the DPI or another part of the state has something that's of value rather than replicating it as possible. To link to it, to package it within the dashboard.
Right.
About that.
Yeah.
So when I think about this question of the purpose of the plan and who's going to use it and how, I don't think that there's any argument that all school leaders and teachers want to eliminate opportunity gaps, improve school and district performance, and increase educator preparedness to meet the needs of every student. I think where it gets murky is that, of course, all schools want to improve climate measures. Of course, all schools are working to increase the percentage of students proficient in reading. All schools are working to increase the number of schools meeting or exceeding growth measure by subgroup. So I kind of go back to what Dr. Bridges was saying. It seems like there's been some conversation and some agreement about the need for locals to be able to take this plan, take the board strategic plan and tailor it to their needs, to fit their local contextual factors, the needs of their students. And this, in its current form, I would say doesn't allow that. It's very, on the one hand, it's very broad in the sense that we're saying improve school climate measures. On the other hand, it's specific enough that there isn't room for districts to put their own stamp on it. And I think it's because a lot of these are stated as they are actually outcomes of things that schools are doing to improve educational outcomes for their students.
And so, like, one example then, for my example, and Dr. Oxstein brought up earlier, teacher working conditions. Like, that is one statewide measure, consistent statewide measure, every other year, 100,000 educators, and our educators are telling us what is the general, this is a good place to work. That literally, that's a question. This is a good place to work. That's a good kind of testament, that's a good measure of school climate. But many of our school districts collect student surveys, parent surveys about school climate. So how would we build the dashboard in such a way that it provides the statewide summary? You know, you use, like, there's teacher working conditions that allows you to compare yourself across the state. But you, Edgecombe, you guys have your, your own kind of data source. So it gives them the flexibility. Also, you might consider local student surveys or parent surveys to help you as a district measure this. So I think that's a great, because then the board and the state are saying, especially for districts maybe that don't have the resources to have their own local, teacher survey or students or whatever it is, then it gives them, like, everybody can have the same baseline. And it sets the priorities. It says, as a state, this is the data source that we value enough that we take the time to have every single teacher respond to it every other year. And so it makes that data accessible, allows you to be able to compare yourself to other districts that look like you, but then gives you the flexibility to do, to include those local priorities.
Another thing that it does is, I'm sitting here thinking, it would also say to me, wow, if you do some comparisons, it's some dimension of the teacher work, TWCS, whatever, I've lost the initials now. But anyway, you could go into one of those 8 dimensions and say, wow, do a regional analysis of that particular dimension. And say, all right, let's go next door and talk to so-and-so, another school district, or another principal, and find out what is happening here to learn from it.
And that would be a value add, because right now it's organized by school and by district and state, and that's it. When you look at the teacher working conditions, the dashboard, like, you can download the data. But I think that's a value add of the dashboard, being able to pick, the comparison piece. And I know we have one more. Yeah, you guys, I'd love to hear from you.
So, I mean, and our kind of feedback dovetails into that pretty well. I think us all being school-based people, we're used to a lot of these pieces of data.
Yep.
We use them a lot. This is very meta compared to what we do. But I think one thing that would help us to make it much more useful at the school level would be to link with the different objectives where that data comes from, because we're going to drill that down and figure out why that is what it is. And it's important to know that you used teacher working conditions, survey questions, blank, 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 to get that climate, so that we know where that comparison is, what we need to work on, and how we can improve that.
Can I add a comment to that? I think understanding that the data is very important, but understanding the data is not as simple as looking at the data and comparing it from one year to another year. And the complexities that go with that, and I'm just going to give one quick example. And these are rough numbers, but Guilford County hit its highest SAT math verbal score at 1010 several years ago. And then several years after, the score was in the 990s. And there was a great deal of apoplexy about that. If you broke down the numbers, it turned out the white students in Guilford County actually scored higher than they ever had before in that previous year, and also scored higher, much higher than the national average. Our students of color also scored higher than the national average and slightly higher than the average before. So you say, well, how can that be? And your score went down on average. And the reason was, and this is a good part of the story, which is a lot more of your students of color were taking the SAT and aspiring to go to a four-year institution. The bad news, completely lost in the headline, is the achievement gap was getting worse. And so, but that's not, there was not one news story that covered it that way, and never any conversation about it that way. These educators would have understood all of that. So, but how we interpret the data, and there's lots of other examples you can give of that, but how do you interpret the data? What the data really means can sometimes be very sophisticated and not what it appears on the surface. Yet data is important. I'm not trying to suggest it's not, but it's complex in ways that you have to look at it, I think. We just need to remind ourselves of that.
That suggests the need for some type of commentary or analysis.
Or it's like that's some sort of additional supports to districts, to school boards, whoever, about like how to communicate about different data elements, kind of building capacity at the local level and state level about what these, these like short headlines, what they really mean, or how you could unpack it, or, asking some questions about why.
Well, to your point, that's exactly what the convenings or the ARP convenings did, what you, Dr. Marr, and your teams did by inviting all districts to come and look at their ELOS data. And we had DPI staff meeting, readily available to sit down with the district and help walk them through that data, because you're right. It's not, it's a skill set. It's there's a lot more to it than just looking at a comparison, and that's, maybe we need to do more of that.
It's like a data literacy sort of conversation. And Dr. Marr and I had a conversation last week, 2 weeks ago, Dr. Howard, with a local level leader who she had some concerns about some of the results from their district. And she was like, we were kind of reassured and talking her through the analysis, like how those estimates were calculated. And she was like, I want the data to tell me why, what is happening in my schools to make our math, our math scores drop. And our response is, the data can't tell you that. Like, you can cut it, you might want to look by different just different student groups, look more deeply at their schools. Like what we're talking about is how it's calculated, the estimates at the state level. But you and your leadership team need to sit down with your data and try to, is it a math teacher was absent for 6 months and you're in a small district? And that can make a huge difference in our small districts. Is it just your elementaries in a particular grade? And so how can you use data but it requires leadership that know the context of the schools and the teachers and the principals and the students.
Could we hear more clarification to kind of cover?
Something that frustrates me to my core as a teacher, just to the very middle, is I will get such beautiful data, all this data, you're growing these people, you're not growing these students, et cetera. And then there you go, good job. And where is the next step? Now that we've taken all of this time to figure out the story, there are so many stories. Now what? Now that we know what we're doing, what are we doing next to fix it? It just feels like everywhere, I love my principal, but like principals or whatever, leadership, they'll say, okay, that's the problem. Good luck, teacher. You got this. And when am I going to go do ridiculous research? We are the brains, right? What are we doing what resources are we giving our teachers and our educators to fix where there are gaps? Mm-hmm. That's the next step. Data is great, but now what? Mm-hmm. What are we doing next? How are we going to fix it? Because that's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. I want to know about it, and then we got to fix it.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting for me to listen to the discussion about the purpose. So I thought of this more about from being a constituent, right? So I'm a mother, and as a mother, where am I going to go to get information? I'm going to go to my school's website. right? As local as possible. I'm a principal. Where am I going to go when I'm strategic planning with my team? I'm going to go to my district, right? But as a constituent, right, I view the purpose more of like, is the state board doing the things that it sets out to do? And I'm oversimplifying that kind of purpose, right? But that's how I would see this dashboard, is not necessarily as a model for a school's plan or a district's plan necessarily. It could be, but I see it more as, are the actions of the state board resulting in the metrics in which we hope based on our plan? That's how I perceived it. And in that purpose or that lens that I took, I see some really good areas in the dashboard. I see some opportunities for better defining terms, right? If I'm a constituent, what does teacher mobility mean, for example? I don't know what that means. Or like more clearly writing out goal 1, 2, and 3 at the top where the dashboard buttons are. So that was just my lens.
So what we're going to do now is move into the groups. You should have Post-it notes near you that have a number. You will return to these seats this afternoon for our work this afternoon, but moving forward until lunch, you will be in these new groups. So group 1 will be on this side of the room. Group 2 will be in the center, and this is group 3. So we're going to go ahead and have you transition, and then we'll move into the next segment.
I don't think you can join with that. I think it's a join with just. I'm going to sneak in for you because I didn't get a sticky note.
She's a teacher.
have you guys do in your smaller groups is look specifically at the handouts that we gave everybody. So the first one I was going to talk about is the standard. It says SBE planning and work session from August. Remember, we were just together a couple of months ago, and we got a session with you guys to talk about data. And so one of the questions I was presenting with two of my colleagues from Vanessa Wren's team, asking some questions about what data do you as a state board member value and think it is important for us to track. And so we had a couple, remember we did like the round table conversations. And so this handout is the summary from that. So we started with some examples. But this was based on the feedback. So when you guys look at potential data sources for student, educator, and family outcomes, you see all of the data elements that as a group during the last work session, you all said matters, is important. Everything, and there was some feedback like initially we had ACT and SAT loop, like kind of grouped together. And somebody was like, but those are really different because AP we collect as a state for every junior. SAT is really what a kid does on their own, you know, and so it's a different data source. And then there's stuff on the back too. So there's say something, school climate surveys, work keys, youth risk behavior surveys. We flagged some data sources for educators. And then the families one is data that we don't necessarily currently have in-house, but we could get it. You can get data from DHHS about families, about family services, things going on in certain zip codes. So these are also data sources that could potentially be helpful. Family surveys. On the next the next column, we identified characteristics for students that are of interest. And I just wanted to raise kind of one example of something that got added. So under other, because we had Julie Pittman and Lynn Harvey in the room when we were having this conversation, they added food insecurity as a data point that is very important that nobody on the, that had not been previously on this list. So I say that to just flag for you all that as we're thinking about this phase 2 of the dashboard, this is a good place to be thinking about. This is a pretty comprehensive data list from the conversations that we had. So I just wanted to give you a minute to just kind of reflect and see what came from that conversation in August. And then as you're reviewing the other handout, here it is. So this one was one that we got that Dan summarized. So these are, I don't know, Dan, if you want to talk about this more, but it's organized around each of the goals. These are the elements that have been identified to be included in the dashboard if possible. And so he's got have the data, no known data available, might have some related, and then some notes. So what we wanted you all to do in your groups is use this as the kind of organizing frame to talk through the data elements listed here, organized by goal. But wanted to give you this reference because we had already done, an hour of talking about what data was most critical. It might give you some ideas about other data elements you could include here. Maria, how are we doing on?
Still slow.
It's still sitting.
Haven't discussed.
Yes. Okay. Let me get the discussion questions. And so here, what we wanted you guys to just, in your small groups, considering the data elements on the Excel spreadsheet, do any stand out as critical areas that need to be included, have some discussion about when data elements are not there, just kind of as a group, maybe organized by, and you don't have to stay in your goal conversations. Like you guys are allowed to look at more than just goal one, looking all the way through. And we have a little bit of time, so maybe 15 minutes in your groups to talk about what you're seeing in these 2 handouts, and then we'll come back and report out.
We'll talk about all 3 goals here.
Yes.
Love that.
So,
I think we're focusing on both three.
Are you ready? Okay, 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. It should be in some of the. Conversation. Okay, this time, I'm gonna start with the goal one group. Stand from focus. Wait, y'all see Dan? Oh, there he is. Dan, will you? I just want to make sure somebody's like tracking what you guys are saying. So we're gonna start reporting out. I just want to make sure that you're. No, y'all are not reporting out? Oh, okay. Miss White is not reporting out. Who else in the group is reporting out? They all, yes, point to the principal.
Can you help guide our conversation by telling us what questions you want us to report?
Yes, so just what did you notice from the data summaries? Do some elements seem more critical than others?
Okay.
You know, what informs the data elements included in the, or what should inform the data elements included in the dashboard? Or anything else you guys want to share out?
Okay. So in order to focus our discussion, we really looked at this strategic planning sheet and looked where there were no known data available. That's how we kind of limited our scope. So we really focused, like Chair Davis mentioned, on goal 3 because there's a lot of no known data available. We spent our time going through each of the objectives and talking about where we could find data to give us a baseline on each of those.
And did you guys come up with some brilliant ideas?
We did. We also had a lot of discussion around the semantics of the objectives, right? So there's a lot of debate about, in particular, increase and strengthen those words, right? So that's for a discussion for another time. But we talked about going to districts to ask questions about what resources are available to teachers. For example, goal objective 3.1.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about going to getting mentor reports from districts for objective 3.2. 3.3 and 3.4 were much harder for us, but we did talk about EPPs providing letters training in their how to read courses, and that's as far as we've gotten in our discussion.
Do districts collect data on mentoring?
Yes.
They do?
Yes.
What does that look like?
So he's going to communicate with HR, talk about how many students in the district, at each school, and then who are the how so I think that could easily be captured.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Mm-hmm.
But we also said it would be unfortunate for that district to receive a ding on their mark because they're in a small county has a low availability of qualified mentors, and they have worked and tried, and they just still couldn't increase the number of mentors because we're not paying them. And because we're not paying them, they're working at Walmart, and they don't have time to come back and mentor our beginning teachers. And we said that we let an enormous amount of capital walk out of the classroom, and they're out there doing other things when they could be pouring in their teachers. That was just an aside. Sorry.
Yeah.
I said I was.
No, but that issue of what is fair among districts, like, well, it's not an even playing field from a human capacity issue, from a many things issue, but part of the conversation we've all been having with the school performance grade conversations, I got to facilitate some of those at AIM last week, and that was exactly where I talked to a group of principals from Onslow County, and that was exactly the point that they raised, like what gets counted on our school performance grade. It's not even, it's not fair. So how do we make sure, and to your point too, about how can we hold all of our districts to the exact same line when they're not all starting from the same place? They don't all have the same kind of equal human resources, those kinds of questions. But I think that raises a great question, and it's for this board to decide, are these the right metrics to include? Is it really about increasing mentorship, or is it about demonstrating commitment to mentorship, or whatever, like that? It's this board's dashboard. It's, you all have every opportunity, every right and opportunity as leaders to say, after reflection, after seeing version 1.0, after having the, what I mean? It's not, I always try to make sure folks, this is set in stone. We don't carve it, we can just change it. if it's not working and accurately reflecting the board's priorities.
Two points on mentorship. One, some districts, a limited number of districts will pay out of district dollars for mentors.
Yeah.
That's going to be comparing to a very large number of districts who do not pay local. Second related point is, should we at some point advocate legislatively to restore mentor pay?
Yes, and that is exactly the type of state level policy decision that the State Board of Education should be using the dashboard to have conversations about and advocate for. Like it's very difficult to advocate at the legislature or to build support for something if you don't have any data that shows the what, like what you're trying to fix or solve. Yeah. Anybody else?
Woo, team one.
Team one. All right, team two. Are y'all team two? Yes. Okay, team two. What are your reflections?
First of all, it was disrespectful that T1 just listened to everything we said. And reported out.
Let the record show.
We heard what you were doing. It's fine. It's totally fine. We still like you. We discussed how important it is for us to define what a subgroup is and which objectives do we want disaggregated versus do we not disaggregated. We thought it was interesting that objective 2.4 did not say by subgroup, and that's the one about proficiency in reading by the end of third grade. That should probably be included. And then we discussed kind of what you were saying. What we were saying about goal 3 and how at first I asked the question, how do we measure this? How can we do that? And then our wonderful grade leader sitting near me said, why don't we just talk to people and see what's working and have conversations and lift up the great things that are happening and maybe somewhere in the dashboard offer those as things that we've seen as promising practices, as anecdotal evidence of things that are actually working. So maybe it's not measurable through a number, but it's measurable in spirit, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah.
And I know that, we don't love spirit, we love data, but
we can love both. We can love both.
We can love both. I love that today.
We agreed that maybe some fine tuning of the verbiage in some of these objectives would be very helpful.
Like define healthy habits.
Culturally relevant.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about, so the department has been working really hard. Angie Mullinex, Dr. Mullinex has been leading a promising practices clearinghouse. So to align, make those direct alignments. And that actually, to get back to your point earlier about as a teacher, okay, you gave me this data, now what do I do with it? Thinking about okay, I need to help my students of color in reading grade 3. And then over here on the Promising Practices dashboard, there's a promising practice in another rural county that's focused on, working with students of color on reading grade 3. Being able to share those, have those conversations across the state, that there's your kind of the alignment in this, so what?
And make it easy to navigate. I'm not going to look for everything. I don't have the filing cabinet digging time, It needs to be so easy to access because we want our students, and we want the teachers to have more time, or educators, or anybody to have more time to think about it versus have to find it. That's the importance of it being, user-friendly.
That's great. Anything else?
And the one that you just mentioned about the middle section, the promising practices is active. Some of that. So,
but it could just be tagging certain, you can tag some of the promising practices by the state board, the state board objective, or can make that alignment explicit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, I definitely do.
Okay, awesome. Okay, group 3. Good job, group 2.
I'll let you just look at me.
No, so we talked about quite a few factors. Things that I think you mentioned are also being with the school performance grade redesign, things that are valued in multiple places. Things like kindergarten readiness, CTE credentials, college and career promise, credits earned, those are really important. ELL screening proficiency, but then we talked about other things that are interrelated on multiple things, like chronic absenteeism and progression toward college, high school graduation. When you look at percent of disciplines by subgroup, how many of those are justice involved? Things that have kind of multiple metrics to understand that story and how they begin to interrelate. But I think you also brought up a really good point that a lot of these are just much more complex ways to measure poverty for lots of schools, and have we done a lot of work to find what we already do?
Okay. One other resource, I think we had it embedded in the slide deck. I don't think we didn't print it out, but something for y'all. Not that I'm giving you guys homework, but we are going to give you a resource. And basically what we had, we did is we took all the annual State Board of Education reports, and we tried to Group 2's question about how was the data disaggregated in those reports. So you all could see, well, this one breaks it down by race and gender and grade, but then not this or not by region or what, so that you all can kind of see in a single spreadsheet, but it's like a big spreadsheet. We felt like we gave you guys enough spreadsheets, but it's there. And then the other thing that we'll share are links to the other dashboards and there's probably more. And I don't think that not that it doesn't matter, but I'm kind of like, y'all are the state board. This is your strategic plan. You set the dashboard to elevate the state board's priorities. It's important that you all know what other dashboards are out there. I also think it's probably important for us to go and talk to the folks that have developed those dashboards to see where their data is coming from and why they made certain decisions. But that's something that we can do as the next step in engaging some of those stakeholders. I think something that certainly has been confirmed for me is we need to have a lot more conversations like what we've had at the board table today, getting people a chance to walk through the dashboard and ask questions and make recommendations on not just like the overall look and what data, but to just from a communication standpoint, making sure our school boards are aware that this exists, our superintendents, our principals, and giving opportunity for feedback on this version 1.0. I think next I'm turning it over to Dr. Petrie Martin, but thank you all for your participation and conversation in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next, you will begin to make some decisions regarding the goals, the objectives, and the components that are listed here. Group 1, we'll start with Goal 1. Group 2, Goal 2. Group 3, Goal 3. You will be receiving dots from Dr. Korn. And in this process, we need for you to make some decisions regarding the objectives and components. So if objectives and components that are already operationalized through available data or metrics, you're going to put a green dot next to that objective and or component. If it's an objective or components that are quantifiable and at least in part can be operationalized through data with some work to define appropriate data and metrics, you will put a yellow dot. And if it is an objective or a component that are not quantified or easily quantified, and for which the data does not appear to be available, it will get a red dot. Okay? Now, you have some documents in front of you that will help you kind of have these types of discussions. You have these documents here. And you will start with your goal, but you'll have an opportunity to see what the other groups have done and add dots to the work of the previous group. But you're starting with your goal. So this side is goal 1, and these charts have wheels on them. So if you want to move them to a location where you have a little bit more space, you can certainly do that. We're also going to ask DPI staff to join one of the 3 groups to add your expertise to what data or metrics might be available. Right? So goal 1, goal 2, move that chart to wherever you want it. And this is goal 3. You will have about 5-6 minutes, and then we'll give you some additional instructions, okay?
Are we individually or we're trying as a group?
Consensus building as a group.
Yes.
Maria, would you first?
That's why we talked about.
So if you notice on here, these are rendering, some of them have components and some of them just have objectives.
Oh, okay. So are we saying?
Y'all in green today,
Example,
different than what
You might know of data that's available, or you might be way of that. That we can get some data.
Just put that in, set it anywhere to be as fine. Too.
Yeah.
Just click on.
No, it's near phone.
Not right there in the box.
Like, so like.
There you go.
Okay, so yeah.
Or you did a break.
That's what it is. From some green. All right, student groups. Okay, number 1, allocate financial to the resources. Mine got says red.
In that it's data driven or and like positive.
So green, if we give it a green, it means that we can local, like, there's data available. Yellow is like, it's quantifiable a little bit, but we don't know what it is. And then red is like, it can be quantified.
I just, I would say advanced.
How are we? Like it's 80%, like that's better. Like say technology, like financial resources. Like it just seems like it's really vague. That's what I'm saying.
State different levels.
So
You say yellow. I'm kind of partial to the binaries.
Well, what I would say is there, and I think Leah's point is well taken. How to, there is data about how do you make progress against that objective. Exactly what Terry did say. How do, in what regard? So that's what I'm saying. I think it's a yellow. It's best. That there may be some data available. Have conversations about what that data means.
And when did you do it? It's like the federal law, like it says it's fast to update, whatever, your operating systems or whatever every 5 years. We did it 5 years ago. Like, they're just like, it's funny thing.
Maybe you need to ask, it's like, that's all we're talking about here.
I tend to say, I know we do.
What is the objective one saying? Yeah.
That's something else.
That's formula.
Not just at the state level. School district level, right? And then they don't start with what I districts, allocating resources.
So we might be a young state.
Maybe, or maybe some. When you say background.
Have no doubt.
It says you're not.
Not easy.
It's very amazing. We have. At the school district. And best experience came out. The whole report was recently on the found that. Now, if they don't leave them, it's their fault. Like how teaching. We're one with it.
Wow. It's not clear.
I mean, the data, I don't think it is. I think that is.
Okay.
But no, yes. Unless you're talking about finding vital accident. So that's, and I'm also looking for some statement of school funds. Other statements.
We did say that. Yeah. Yes. Because we have had it. We don't have a base. Do you think that's right?
And then it gets to 8 and 9. Yeah, they're all good. I think they're all good. Then that's what we have. Yellow, and I'll be Jessica Bailey. It's going to be our training. The number of which I have signed over here. I would like
Number of school seniors.
That's very great. Okay. Yeah.
I might be for how it gets to be measured, like when we started.
I don't think we have.
What defines being operational?
Access to data is operational. So it might ask just to make sure what's not.
Right.
All right. But if I'm having an operational, charge was having for operational. If you have guidelines, to be done. They have we're just saying we have it. I think they do. So operational. What does that mean? State board. Statewide or just statewide. I was yellow. I thought yellow originally. What about the flags? It wasn't on our thing. Number 12, well prepared in every state.
Well, what is the definition of well prepared?
There it is. How are we defining? What about professional that they operate policy?
So that first profession, you're going to be like, what is disruptive behavior means? Like, that would be like, that's EY additional. So like, what is that definition?
Everybody's going to do it like so.
Let's start right there.
Well, I'm telling you, we might say doing a lot of professional development.
Well, I was going to say, you would have to define what well prepared is before I would know whether or not to make data.
You have to say that they're doing that growth. Definition of well prepared would be. That's a or is it licensure program?
See, I read that as what the preparation is. There are plenty of people in government
You really want it to be.
So that thing, I was thinking about that. I mean, they're being qualified to go over here, which increases their benefits. But I think you hit on it exactly what you're looking for, increasing the conservative. So I would give that objective really yellow, just because I think it's ill-defined as it is.
Do you all agree for yellow?
Well, I guess you for green.
Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad about that?
Going back to the
I would like to know how you would know. There are a lot of so what?
I thought you said it.
7.5. You have something. Put everything together.
Now better speak up on the streets. That's
We do that, right? We don't do that.
Under some.
But we do. So it's kind of, when I, people say skip this. That we have a limited, that is. The fact that it would be said.
So here's a question then, I guess, to Alexis, which is, how, and this goes back to what you were saying about how everything is aligned to the goal. Allocation of resources. Do we have the data? Because obviously we're doing those things. As you said, as CFO, I can probably doing those things. But are those things then, do we have data that shows how those things improve? That's where I go, you're doing it. You're being, and that's why I think maybe so rewriting the deck, which I think is what we're saying the same thing.
And then, of course, if they have to say, and say, okay. So, either way, you don't let it make us. If there was a.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I get where they're building it up for now. The school district have to get where that's there to do it. That's what I think that in and of itself would be a strategic plan to it's
you to the next step. Okay? So if we could have your attention. We are going to move you along to the next set of questions. So what we need you to do now is take a look at the work that you have completed. We really need for you to focus on questions 2 and 3. So taking a look at your yellow and red items, we need to really understand, or there are data sources that you think are most appropriate or that might be added. We're going to ask for documentation of your responses on your Post-it notes, which are near you. Someone should be scribing the answers to these questions. Then we will ask you to put your Post-it on the objective that you are giving us an answer to. For number 3, it says for the red items, how should the State Board of Education deal with them? Should there be items that are identified as aspirational or conceptual priorities? Should there be items that do not have metrics, but instead have evidences of implementation from schools and districts? So that's the next phase of the work. So again, go back into your groups. Let's focus on the yellow and the reds and answer some of these questions. Please put your responses on the Post-its and we'll have them put on the boards. And eventually we'll do a gallery walk so we can see all the groups' work. Okay?
I was gonna say,
Go back into your groups.
started. Districts.
Cut that in half. Like, half.
I know, we're gonna say, bring up.
We're ready to get started with group one. I'm not sure who's reporting out for group one.
Do you want to report? You can get your name.
Okay. And then after group one, we will move to group two and then group three. And we are asking you to use the microphone there for us to make sure we hear all of your valuable comments.
Start us off.
How long is this?
Okay, we spent a lot of time talking about what we see of these components being done in schools versus districts versus at a state level. And so much of our discussion around whether a dot was green, yellow, or red was around that discussion. And then our sticky notes really talk about either where the data source could come from, what we need in a data source, or how we might change some of the wording of our components. Is all that accurate?
Good job.
Any questions? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to spend hours on this microphone with my musical stylings and fantastic wit. However, we are going to give the microphone to one of our very special guests, the superintendent of the Thomasville City Schools, Dr. Chris Kennedy.
All right, I'm gonna have to come around over here because I can't see it. I can't see our board. So with goal 2, when we're looking at improving school and district performance, many of our objectives are specifically related to data sources that are available. So if we're talking about increasing proficiencies in math or increasing proficiencies in subgroups, all of that data is readily available. The conversation in our group centered around the objectives where the data sources may not be so clear. So if we're talking about allocating financial, business, and technology resources, define how. What does that look like, and what kinds of measures go to make that consistent? We also talked about increasing the number of charter schools meeting or exceeding academic, operational, financial goals. That should be a goal that our group felt is applicable for all PSUs and not just charter schools, even though we know that charter schools have some specific things that they have to meet there. And then the last one, in Objective 9, we talked about increasing the number of qualified and well-prepared principals in every school. Again, define how. How do you define qualified? How do you define well-prepared? And I think what we were looking for there is to have an effective principal in every school.
The only thing I'd add to that first point is the Objective 1 reads, at least to me, like a compliance issue. And we're not so much after, although we do want to comply with the law, we're after improving performance. The question is, shouldn't we review our laws and policies to see what impact they're having on school performance? And go from there. So that was another idea.
Suggested some rewording.
Yes, some rewording.
The Post-its are all reworded.
Right, and instead of just allocating, review the allocations to make sure, and the processes to make sure that we meet those goals.
I was voluntold. But, so I think the chairman's last comment was really pertinent to what we kind of talked about here, right? Our first we kicked off our conversation and I'd asked a question of the group, who is the dashboard for? And how many folks, state board members, have looked at this dashboard or use it regularly, look at it regularly? Because I think those two questions are really pertinent to what you're trying to do overall. If the dashboard is for districts, we're not certain how this helps a district. I mean, I'd sat and listened to, Dr. Bridges, Dr. Green. The data that they have is available to them. They use it already. It's on their school performance grade report card. So they have both things they're held accountable for and then things that are contextual, that are part of their data source that they use to make decisions. So with that frame, we kind of went through and talked about some of these different things, and a number of them we felt like were conceptual in nature and not necessarily measurable. And we weren't quite sure, for example, while increasing the number of mentors available to beginning educators is really important, what's the definition of a mentor? Because it's different from one district to another. And if I participate in the beginning teacher support program, does that person count as a mentor? If my mentor is not in my field, does that person count? So I'm left with all these questions about equity. And then there are some things like increasing culturally relevant equity-focused resources. A great aspirational goal. We don't provide curriculum to districts. So is that excluded from this list? What do we mean exactly when we talk about resources? And so we had that kind of over and over. Educator engagement. What does engagement mean? If I have block planning for all my math teachers, is that engagement inside the school? If I send teachers to the AIM conference, is that engagement outside the school? So there are lots of ill-defined things, and we're not quite sure what the end goal is here with this dashboard. And if it's to provide support to districts, then we need to have conversations with district leaders about what they want. But if it's not for districts and it's for the state board, then perhaps it should be focused on things that the state board directly controls. And we had a great conversation with Newton Conover, who had a grant for
Is at the door.
right? Who had a digital learning grant to do micro-credentialing for teachers. That's something the state board funded. We should be measuring the impact of that program and the funding and the ROI on that program. And we could do that if we thought about kind of what were the measurable things connected to the very specific things the state board is funding or controlling.
Yeah, I would just say in response, if we're going to limit ourselves to the things the state board controls, we could write it on one sticky note. Part of our role is, there is some degree of control. A big part of our role is influence, inform, and support. And this plan needs to cover all of those, whether we actually control specific actions needed or not.
But it has to be something that our superintendents and principals will use. And what we're hearing is that in its current state, it's not something that aligns easily with what they're doing. They can maybe pick out some pieces and find some alignment there, but and there's, I think there's too a difference between the plan and the dashboard and the way that those two things can be used. And I go back to Elena's comments about the three different ways that you're viewing this as a parent, as a school leader, as a constituent. And the the variety of ways that one can approach looking at both the dashboard and the plan.
All right, so thanks to everybody for the conversation and kind of digging in on the dashboard with us. I think Dan and I are going to be the kind of 2 point people for State Board and for DPI around some next steps. And so based on some of the conversations we heard today, we were kind of anticipating what might be some early next steps. The conversation today, I think, really is a good check that the direction we are heading. So really thinking about an internal working group, right? That there needs to be some conversations with DPI level leadership, because they're the ones that are, the business owners of a lot of this data. They use it every day to drive decisions about rolling out and supporting statewide initiatives. So an internal working group of DPI leaders, also thinking about external PSU advisors, really looking to this board to help us think about where are the right places to plug in. There's already a lot of existing groups like that. So how can we bring the current version of the dashboard to them, get some input? It's live. Let's talk about it, which parts of it are most beneficial and useful, what maybe could be tweaked or revised. Looking for data insights. I think all the groups identified and lifted up this idea about metric definitions, alignment with other resources and reporting standards inside the agency, at the state board, trying to define use cases, developing a dissemination plan. How do we make sure all of our different stakeholder groups are aware of this as a resource? Something that I've, given my role in the agency, have been pushing is how could we use the dashboard as a way to track recovery from the pandemic? What is that lens? How does that lens show up in the dashboard? And also new data sources. So something we're going to bring to the board January, soon, is a conversation about the National Student Clearinghouse data. What data? That is a brand new, rich and robust data set we've never had as a state before. And so when this dashboard was developed, it wasn't even a thing yet. And so what should we include on some of the new data sources that we have? How should we be leveraging the National Student Clearinghouse to help think about outcomes for students and the post-secondary and those post-secondary paths? Thinking about those new data sources. And then certainly we'll work directly with Maria, with the strategic planning committee about what's the right timeline and cadence of information as we're working directly with the board, bringing recommendations and revisions back from the field. I don't know if there are any other pieces that are missing from this as far as next steps go that anybody wants to make sure we add to the list. Oh, Maria has a few. Okay.
So as Dr. Korn was stating, our goal is to take all of the work that you have done here and hopefully bring that back to you as early as January to begin looking through these possible revisions and possible changes. Once we get your approval to move forward on those recommendations, our next step is to go back to the work that the staff and the advisors and the board did on August 31st, where we sat together as a team and we looked at some of the biggest leverage points to move work, which include advocacy, legislation, policies, practices, and data usage, to make sure that once we have this solid and we begin that communication process with our stakeholders, what are the leverage points we're going to use to ensure that this work continues to move? So we have a lot of work to do between now and the start of 2023. But the three of us have been discussing how excited we are because the discussion was so rich today in really thinking through. This work was done in 2019, and I think we needed this time to take a step back and dig into it once again and provide some feedback. So, Chair, I will turn it back over to you to move it forward, and lunch is ready for us.
Why don't we go have lunch, and let's see, it's 12:20, 1 o'clock? Let's reconvene at 1. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's that. Huh?